Good evening and welcome. My name is Eddie Tuiavi, and it is my pleasure to host tonight's dialogue on support for storm-affected families. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us in the midst of the Christmas rush. We realise that it's the end of the year and it is a very busy time for all. I'd like to introduce our panellists first. There will be some familiar faces for those who were at our previous webinar. To my right, your name, sir?
Mace Ward, pleasure to be here.
Kia ora, good evening. And to my left, Eho?
Kia ora, Linda Greenhalgh.
And further to the left?
Hello everybody, Matt Tucker.
A very good evening indeed to you all. A reminder to you all that this webinar is being recorded and will be available in our next recovery newsletter. With hundreds of people joining us here tonight and the numbers continuing to rise, we've disabled your cameras and microphones to protect your privacy and allow things to run smoothly. There's a lot to get through, so let us move through quickly. There is a Q&A segment to follow after the presentations and after everybody has shared thoughts and insights tonight, so please save any questions you may have until then. Now, a quick recap on the topics we are discussing today. On tonight's agenda, property categories, Category 2P Mitigation Scheme, grant funding for risk-related work on homes, Category 3 Buyout Scheme, voluntary buyouts, disputes, limbs and property files, resolving insurance claims, New Zealand Claims Resolution Service, other support options, frequently asked questions, and of course the live Q&A session, which I alluded to just earlier. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt Tucker this evening. Matt, over to you, Chief.
Thank you very much. Firstly, could I just take the opportunity to build on what Eddie said about this time of year in particular? You can imagine, because of the role here that I lead in the team, that I get to see and meet lots of affected homeowners whilst out and about around Auckland. And even at other times of year, it's difficult to articulate and understand some of the really, really difficult situations that people find themselves in. And just picking up on what Eddie said about the time of year now, which is stressful without anything else on top of it. You know, coming up to Christmas can be a stressful time for many people. Add that on top of some of the situations that so many people are in. It's just really, really difficult, and I just wanted to acknowledge some of that difficulty for homeowners. We're working through an incredibly high volume of risk assessments in Auckland. Thousands of homes need to be visited and seen by either flood specialists or geotechnical specialists. And I want to be frank with you tonight, as best I can in this conversation, that is going to take some time. The majority of homeowners will have had their categorisation by next March. So as we carry on through the year, categorisations will continue, with most of them having been completed by March. I have to also say, though, that some categorisations are going to take longer than that, possibly up until July, and I'll come back to the reasoning for that in a second. It would be an understandable question to ask, and I am asked it frequently, actually, why has this already taken 10 months? So just wanted to give you a little bit of context around why the 10 months. It's worth reflecting upon the enormous negotiations that had to take place. The buyout schemes in Auckland are part of a $2 billion package of works, which was agreed between Auckland Council and central government, the Treasury, and that took time. This is unprecedented work for both the Treasury and Council, and how the work was going to be carried out, the process, the funding, all of it had to be produced from first principles. So it took quite some time to organise where the money would come from and how the cost share would work. Then there was a consultation process required. Again, particularly in the context of Auckland Council, this sort of work isn't done by Council. Council doesn't traditionally get into the purchase or the support of private properties. It's not a thing that any council does in New Zealand, never mind Auckland Council. So there was a consultation process which had to be carried out with all the ratepayers in Auckland who are all contributing to these buyouts. So there was some time required for that consultation process. And then the last point I was going to make about why 10 months, the categories didn't exist either. Categories 1, 2 and 3 that we're going to talk about in quite a lot more detail shortly didn't exist before midway through 2023. With the best will in the world, central government produced a categorisation framework at a very high level. And then each of the councils involved, Auckland, Hawke's Bay, Tairafiti, had to develop the detail that sat underneath those 3 categorisations. And everybody wants that to be robust, right? Nobody wants to be given a categorisation that's been thrown together in a hurry and then find that there's been a mistake made and the categorisation needs to change. So there's always a balance between speed and accuracy and sort of robust, defensible decisions. I think the last thing that I'll probably touch on is July. I said some homeowner categorisations might not be available until July. And the reasoning behind that is what's called primarily community level infrastructure. So category 2C solutions, where there's a larger scale retaining wall, a larger scale drainage scheme, perhaps a blue-green network that some of you may be familiar with, that needs to be considered, designed, scoped and priced before we can then move into the more granular detail of home categorisation. That has to follow after the high-level engineering has been done. So there are a number of locations in Auckland where there's some larger scale construction works that just simply need to be worked through methodically before the specifics of home categorisation then kind of cascade down from those decisions. So I think I'll leave that there and hand over now to Mace to talk some more about the details of property categorisation.
Kia ora, Matt, and good evening, everyone. Just really focusing on the category overview. Categorisation is an administrative scheme, as Matt outlined. It's not a legislative program. And it relates specifically to the Auckland Anniversary Weekend floods and Cyclone Gabrielle. So it's very focused on those 2 extreme weather events. As Matt said, the scheme is informed by the government framework and then Auckland Council's policy, which went out to consultation to get the views and preferences of Aucklanders to make those final decisions. And the key intent is to remove people from homes that pose an intolerable risk to life. That means there's a relatively high threshold to meet that intolerable risk to life, and meaning that the majority of households will fit into category 1 or won't be part of the scheme. And it is a focus on future events rather than these existing events, really thinking about what the risks are in future. You'll recall that category 1's not eligible for public funding. Only category 3, category 2P are eligible for that property level funding. Matt mentioned category 2C, which is on the diagram tonight, and that is that community level funding where there's a blue-green network, a drainage scheme, retaining wall, debris barrier, or the likes if it's related to land. We acknowledge that category 1 homeowners with their insurance companies are managing the funding of their own storm resilience in some cases, as well as repairing homes from those events, including with EQC. It's Auckland ratepayers and government who are helping to pay for the severely storm-affected homes. So we need to strike that balance on what is fair and affordable. In other words, we can't afford to fund all categories. Funding is available for those homeowners who need it most in category 2P and category 3 properties. Just turning to the Auckland Council, the category update. So we've been working really hard and we appreciate that it can't come soon enough for anyone to get that certainty and also or to repair people's homes or move on. But behind the scenes, we've got through as many assessments as we can. So we have completed over 1,000 site assessments out on the property working with many of you, possibly, to understand the impacts on your property and what the impacts are in a particular location. And approximately 1,600 desktop assessments. So we would be able to use our hydrological modelling or the hazard management tools that we have to really understand what the hazards are in a location. That critical balance is something we need to apply in terms of doing this work. And I'm pleased to say we're now starting to make real progress, having gone through a peer review process of how we're undertaking that categorisation, how we're undertaking the risk assessments, and moving on. We've completed, as I said, just over almost 2,600 assessments, and we'll see the majority of those completed by the end of March next year is our plan, with some being more complex and needing to continue through until June. Really just thinking about the intolerable risk to life on the next slide, and this is about societal norms. So as we know from the previous slide, measuring the intolerable risk to life is the critical part of the criteria set by the government framework, and it helps us understand the risk, which is the driver behind your category if you're involved. Intolerable risk to life is defined as a risk that's generally not acceptable to society. So many of you will understand the road toll and road safety. Typically that's a 1 in 10,000 risk to life that's applied in those situations. For flooding, the intolerable risk to life is based on the depth of water and the speed of water around the house, including an evacuation route. So there has been a real focus on not only the home where people are living, but also the evacuation route and being able to escape from a home safely. For landslides, it's based on probability of a landslide hitting the house or someone being in a home and dying as a result. In other words, if the probability is more than 1 in 10,000 of that happening in a year, it is intolerable. And that's typically where the international benchmarks are. So we've been qualifying that again as international benchmarks and the professions that deal with hazard management. Now, just turning to some background on Category 2P and Category 3. As I said before, this is an administrative scheme, so not legislated. One of the schemes, one-off schemes, meaning they will not necessarily be repeated for future weather events. So just limited to the 2 key weather events at the beginning of 2023. And both are eligible for public funding, with 50-50 ratepayer and government funding for Category 3 and Category 2P. It is voluntary to opt in, so there is no compulsion for opting into the categorisation process. It must contain a legal residential dwelling, so commercial properties aren't included, and where there's vacant land, that is also not included in the scheme. Both need to meet a threshold of intolerable risk to life, so both Category 2P and Category 3. Allocated Category 2P or Category 3 via the Auckland Council technical risk assessments. So that's that work that's been occurring in the field and across desktops to compare models and really assess what the risks are. So just really now turning to some of the online resources. So you'll find these guides and more in your downloadable resource library on the Auckland Council website. The team will put that link into the chat. Recently, the Category 2P Mitigation Scheme handbook has been issued, and not that long ago, the Category 3 buyout scheme handbook has also been issued. I really encourage you to look at these resources and also look at the document hub on Auckland Council's website where the link points you to. There is important information there that may help you in making your decisions and understanding the categorisation process. So just turning to Category 2P property risk and the mitigation scheme, it's important that you know that if your home is categorised as Category 2P, there will be financial support. if you need it, to help you make the changes that are needed to reduce the risk to life at your home. As a homeowner, though, you'll be responsible for actually commissioning the work and getting it completed, but we will provide financial assistance. Insurance companies only really insure for damage to property. Category 2P is about a resilience program, so not typically insurable. And just determining, for the next slide, determining the Category 2P, you'll see, as I said before, Category 1 is a tolerable risk, and Category 2 and 3 above that risk threshold are intolerable. Affordable is Category 2 or Category 2P, and unaffordable Category 3, so requiring a buyout, so the mitigation will be unaffordable. Category 2P properties are those that could have a change made on them to reduce the risk to life. So that may mean things like lifting a home, building a retaining wall, building a debris barrier or a landslide, or changing the drainage around the home. This is different to 2C, which will require some level of community intervention to reduce the risk to a group of homes where public land or intervention is practicable. That's those sorts of interventions like the Blue-Green Network program that Matt mentioned, or often referred to as making space for water or stormwater management. There are two parts to figuring out if something is feasible. Firstly, it's whether an engineering solution is technically possible. That means looking at whether there's actually enough space to construct a retaining wall, or whether the topology of the house means it can actually be lifted, that type of thing. The second part of feasibility is whether it's affordable and can be delivered within a reasonable time frame. And in the case of the scheme, that reasonable time frame is within 2 years. Engineers will tell you, of course, and Matt being an engineer, that anything is possible if you have enough money. But we need to put this into a realistic cap on what could be spent on mitigation. So Category 2P, just a bit of a summary. Category 2P's a real recognition by Auckland Council that funding any mitigation to protect a home from flooding or landslide is out of the reach financially for many homeowners. It also allows people to stay in their homes where it's safe to do so and reduce the impact on the housing market for Auckland. I would like to reiterate that this is a grant scheme, with the first part of the grant about confirming feasibility. So that feasibility includes assessing, is the project feasible, what would the design of the project look like, and resource consents if those are required. And the second part of the grant is for construction, and that's to be managed and delivered by the homeowner. If your home has been allocated a Category 2P, then the grant value for fixing the property is 25% of the property's CV. So that means if your home had a CV of $1 million, mitigations that cost up to $250,000 are considered feasible. And as I said, these mitigations need to be able to be delivered within 2 years from the date of the grant being agreed. Homeowners, again, just saying, homeowners are responsible for managing the works and any cost overruns and ongoing maintenance post-mitigation. Just in terms of cost overruns, any assessment of any project would include a contingency reasonable to deliver on that project. If mitigations aren't feasible after the scoping phase, a home would move into Category 3 and be subject to a buyout situation. So just moving to some scenarios to give an idea and a flavour of what we have seen and what we anticipate seeing. There are some scenarios that fall outside the box, and we've done our best to accommodate different scenarios to allow homeowners more flexibility. Our real focus has been the ability to recruit into the categorisation scheme so that people get help and reduce or eliminate the intolerable risk to life. For example, in these scenarios, properties where mitigation is greater than 25% of CV, the homeowner may be eligible at the discretion of the council, subject to the owner covering the costs above 25%. Where the homeowner is not able to manage the works, total costs can cover cost of a project manager or special circumstances process may apply to allow that to happen. Just some other things to be aware of. If feasible intervention is cross-boundary, the property will be a Category 3 unless written permission can be obtained from a neighbour or neighbours in doing a collective Category 2P risk mitigation scheme. If the required mitigation work is not completed, a notice remains on the limb. So there is a real incentive to complete those works. So what's the pathway look like? And this is in the homeowners guide that you can download. But here's the example, and I'm not going to go through it, but largely it is a stepwise pathway through Category 2P that allows gateways along the way, including a review of any proposal that the council puts up in terms of categorisation, feasibility of the project, and then the delivery of the project as well. Just moving, I'll now hand over to Matt to talk about the Category 3 buyout support scheme. Kia ora, Matt.
Thank you, Mace. Just to quickly reiterate again the simple principles behind Category 3. Mace has said this already. The scheme is voluntary, so homeowners opt in, and it's about intolerable risk to life and removing homeowners from intolerable risk to life that can't be appropriately mitigated. And Mace has described in some detail how that mitigation and those assessments are made. So a little bit more information on the Category 3 buyout scheme. So we've chosen a pre-market valuation date of the 26th of January 2023, and that determines the starting point for the voluntary buyout offers for Category 3. That's a single date for all properties affected by the events, regardless of whether it was the floods or Cyclone Gabriel. A valuation is organised by a registered valuer, and that's paid for by Auckland Council. If you disagree with the valuation, there's an opportunity to raise a dispute, and I'll talk about the dispute process a little bit later. Council offers 95% of the value of an insured property, less any insurance payouts, which includes the EQC. So this means that the property owner is making a 5% contribution towards the cost of the buyout. Vacant sections and Crown land and properties are not included in the Category 3 buyout process. There is a special circumstances category, which, as Mace alluded to and actually talked to in some detail when he was talking about Category 2, it is intended to catch up nuance that we haven't adequately catered for in Category 3 as well. And I should have talked about uninsured properties. So for properties that are not insured, at least 80% of the property's value is offered by council, up to, again, that maximum of 95%. So that means property owners in uninsured properties are making a larger contribution than those in properties that are insured. Mace, did you want to talk about the Category 3 pathways?
Thanks very much, Matt. So this slide shows you the pathway and the gates that you can find in the Category 3 handbook. It's also in the Category 2P handbook that's online. So really, I won't go into it in detail, but there is a pathway there which allows you to go through that process and give consideration, ask questions, and get advice as you go through the process, whether it's Category 2P or Category 3, and that in a voluntary way. Matt, I'll hand back to you to talk about reviews and disputes.
We recognise that this is a difficult process for all of you that will be involved with it, and that you may have concerns about either your categorisation or the market valuation. And for that, we've created a dispute process to enable you to instigate a review of our decisions. And you can find the details of both of those processes in either the Cat 3 or the Cat 2P handbook, depending on which category you're talking about. If you disagree with your categorisation, there's 3 months to submit a disagreement, but we suggest that you do that as quickly as possible rather than wait for the 3 months. And similarly, the market valuation, I'd also suggest you do that as quickly as possible, but that has 1 month. So there's 1 month for you to submit a dispute for your market valuation. I can tell you that we're already engaged in conversations with some homeowners about their categorisations where they've submitted a dispute, and some of them quite literally get reassessed and changed, if I'm being frank, within about a week. So unless it's particularly complicated, a lot of disputes can be worked through really quickly and really efficiently. Now, just for a little bit of feedback on LIMS and property files. To ensure transparency, Auckland Council has to disclose Category 2 and Category 3 properties on LIMS and in property files. There's a bunch of legislation that sits underneath that. I'm not going to read out all the categorisations and Official Information Act meetings, yada yada to you, but there's some law that means we have to make those disclosures. And correspondence relating to Category 1 is also on the property file, but not in the LIM. Linda.
So kia ora, Linda Greenoch here, and I am covering the slide today on behalf of our good friends at the New Zealand Claims Resolution Service, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But we know that there are lots of people struggling to get through the processing of their insurance claims, and in fact lots of questions coming up about future insurability and particularly how that relates to categorisation. So we thought it was important that we talk to you a little bit about this service. Unfortunately, because they're not here, we won't be able to give insurance advice here or respond to specific questions, but we really do want to understand what those questions are. So please pop them in the chat and we will follow up on those for you. So the New Zealand Claims Resolution Service is a government service, and it's actually grown out of the Canterbury earthquakes, and as of this year has been scaled across all of Aotearoa. The kaupapa is around supporting homeowners to achieve timely, fair and enduring resolution of residential insurance claims, and particularly those resulting from a disaster. So the scope of services offered by NZCRS is pretty broad and all completely free and confidential. So that the services range from advice and case management, where they can actually act on behalf of a homeowner in terms of liaising with their insurance company. Also includes the ability to give access to legal advice, engineering services, referrals for mental health and wellbeing support, as well as mediation, which is about providing a neutral third party to help insurers and homeowners come to a resolution. So the team at New Zealand Claims Resolution Service have given some top tips for working with insurance company, which I will cover. But my number one top tip is to contact New Zealand Claims Resolution Service. They're a really easy bunch to deal with, make things really simple, and they now have Auckland-based team as well, which is fantastic. So their tips are, insurers are agents for EQC, and they are undertaking damage assessments on EQC's behalf. So don't worry if you haven't had a visit from EQC or if you haven't talked directly to EQC, the insurance company acts on their behalf now. It's up to a homeowner to provide evidence about what's been lost in the event of an insurance claim. So make sure that you are gathering and keeping any evidence that you can to demonstrate your loss. Review your insurance policy to check cover. So they often find that people have additional coverage that they didn't know that they were eligible for, and that could include things like legal fees, retaining wall top-ups. So absolutely just worth rechecking that policy to see what you could be covered for. And this one is really really important. Do not please sign a full and final settlement from your insurance company unless it's been reviewed by a lawyer or NZCRS. So a reminder, you can go and have that review and have that conversation through NZCRS for free. You cannot go back to your insurance company if additional damage is uncovered after you've had that full and final settlement. So it's really important that you have it reviewed. And I'm not sure if I think they're talking to both us in the recovery office and to you homeowners here. And I guess it's the expectation setting, which is that it does take time and it will take time to resolve your insurance claim in a large event like the Auckland flooding and Cyclone Gabriel, particularly if there's any complexity associated with the particular claim. So you will have likely heard me talk about other support options here, so I'm just going to whiz through these. This is also all up on our Auckland, so if you want to find out more about what support is available, please pop onto our Auckland/recovery. So we've stood up a recovery navigation service. The navigators are working across Tāmaki Makaurau, and they're working both with anyone who's been impacted by the weather event. So whether that's a tenant, a homeowner, somebody going through the categorisation process, this is a service to support. They don't have all the answers, but what they do have is that ability to walk alongside you to get the information you need and to connect you with services and support. And that could be mental health wellbeing services. It could be helping you to get furnishings, or if you've lost possessions, they can support you in that way. So please, if you or someone you know could benefit from even just an initial conversation, flick us an email at navigators@aucklandcouncil.govt.nz. 1737. I think, the team have already done a really good job of acknowledging that this is a pretty tough period that we're heading into. Christmas can be hard at the best of times, but for those who are going through this really life-changing experience, we need to take even more care of one another. Feeling overwhelmed, feeling anxious, upset, all of the emotions are completely normal, but it really does help to talk. So reach out, talk to your friends and family if you can, or know that there's other people around. Contact one of the navigators, or you can free call or free text 1737 anytime to talk to or text a trained counsellor or a peer support worker. And finally, we know a lot of people are doing it tough financially. We don't have all of the solutions here, but we really do encourage you, please, even if you did it a few months ago, check back in with Work and Income. They can check your eligibility for financial assistance, including the temporary accommodation assistance payment, but also other general services and products. Andy, it looks as though you can look in the chat function for these useful links. So the Recovery e-newsletter is a really great summary about funding support and announcements affecting storm-affected property owners and their neighbourhoods. So join up and you can unsubscribe at any time. Pop onto the Recovery section on our Auckland website. And we've also got a really handy new comprehensive document library, which you can access. Over to you.
Sure, thank you very much to our panellists this evening. There's a lot of information to take in there. On a personal note, I want to remind you that if you do need to talk to somebody, you can free call or free text the number 1737. In case you missed it, the number for the New Zealand Claims Resolution Service is 0508 624 327. Thank you to those of you that have submitted questions. We did have an overwhelming response, and so A, we take great care to try and address all of those, and B, we'll try and take the time tonight to work through as many of those as possible. So while my colleagues to my left and right get in the mindset, the mind frame. I also want to let you know tonight that the PowerPoint presentation wasn't just devised of their own volition. They took the time to hear what you were saying, hear the frustration, the anxiety, and try and incorporate that into tonight's PowerPoint presentation. So thank you all very much indeed for submitting those questions to us. We're now going to try and address most of those frequently asked questions, followed by a live question and answer session where you can submit questions to our panelists. And, you know, when you think about the incredibly difficult and complex and complicated journey, the emotional one that all of you have been on since the beginning of this year, Linda, I can't help but think about wellbeing and support for all of those that were affected, all 600 plus that are on tonight's webinar and many, many more. Linda, displacement from the home is only one way to understand impact. How have you determined vulnerable people? What about people who have had to stay in their flood damaged homes, of which we all know? We all know one or two or three or more families that are in this predicament, living above dirt floors because they can't afford to rent anymore, or living in cars on their property because of thieves and other criminal behaviour. Linda, how have we determined vulnerable people?
Yeah, kia ora. That's a really good question, Eddie. Yeah, look, displacement is the criteria that we're using to prioritise those assessments, but we know it's relatively crude as well. So it is just one thing that we're using to determine what that priority should look like. Once we know people's circumstances, and it's really important that we understand people's individual circumstances, we will then consider that as we move towards our the prioritisation of assessments. But just to be really clear, an inability to live in your home, we know that the outcomes for people are going to be much worse if they're not in their own home. They're more likely to have additional financial strain. They're more likely to be away from their friends, whānau, social networks, schools, workplaces. And we know, unfortunately, from other disasters that there's also poor mental wellbeing outcomes if you're in temporary accommodation. So we do think it is the right starting place. If you think, though, that there are things that we should consider as well, please do reach out and let us know. You can, best place to do that is navigators@aucklandcouncil.govt.nz, and we'll have one of the team have a chat and talk about the circumstances.
Thanks, Linda. A couple of slides ago, you spoke about the Storm Recovery Navigation Service, which is support for wellbeing, access to information and connecting with community support services. Are tenants able to get Navigator support?
Yeah, absolutely, Eddie. Yep, and we really encourage anybody in that situation to reach out. We know that there's people who were impacted through those events who still haven't been able to get back on their feet. So absolutely.
Thank you, Linda. And I want to pivot to category 3 questions. Matt, Mace, you're both here. And even for me listening this evening and also being involved in previous webinar, there's a lot of information to take in around categorisation, around the numbers that people can contact. I want to ask about the council's role in contributing to any costs for legal fees or other costs. What's the council's role in contributing to that?
Thanks, Eddie. And it is a lot of information to take into account. But in terms of contributing to costs for legal fees and other costs in a Category 3 buyout, the council will pay a one-off contribution of $5,000 to be given to the Category 3 homeowners towards professional fees, legal advice, financial advice, alternative valuation advice. The initial homeowner meeting with your property advisor will explain how to claim that contribution. And this is only available once you're in the property buyout process. So we have people are receiving those contributions now, and we're seeing real progress to getting people those issues resolved for Category 3 property owners, I'm pleased to say.
Thanks, Mace. Can I downgrade from Category 3 to Category 2P or dispute my Category 3 if I pay for the mitigations myself?
Yes, you can. This depends on the reason why the mitigation is not considered feasible for your property, but if the mitigation aren't feasible because it's not possible to reduce the risk to a tolerable level, then it will remain a Category 3. But if the mitigation aren't feasible because it will cost more than the maximum amount of 25% of a CV, then the council that the council will pay, but you choose to pay that difference to stay in your home, and it is technically feasible to deliver that solution, then yes, that is something we can consider through a special circumstance.
Thanks, Mace. You, Matt and Linda, have spoken about some of the mitigating factors around why this has been such a drawn-out, lengthy process. And, you'll appreciate that we're coming up to the summer period and the festive season. A lot of people want certainty, right? And a question that was posed by one of our viewers / listeners on the webinar tonight is, how long will the buyout process take? Have we some kind of a definitive time period or time frame for that?
Thanks, Eddie. We do have a couple of time frames. One is you'll have a month to accept or decline the offer once that is made. The timeline will be different for different people, and it depends on an individual situation. But for most homeowners, it will take anywhere from 2 to 3 to 6 months at the very, very most. If there's a valuation dispute, it may take longer. But we are starting to see those sale and purchase agreements come through now from November. So I'm pleased that people are entering into the process and we're moving things along and providing relief that people are seeking with Category 3 buyouts.
Thanks, Mace. I'll pose one more to you before I bring our friend Matt into the conversation this evening. If Category 3 people don't accept the buyout now, what would happen in the future if there are more severe weather events? Have you an update in that space?
Thanks, Eddie. The buyout scheme is a one-off at present. So I think Matt mentioned that Auckland Council typically doesn't buy out properties in these situations. That is a matter for private property owners and insurers. So there's no guarantee what support, if any, will be available for homeowners in future events if their property's damaged by a severe weather event.
Thanks, mate. Pivoting to you, Matt, this evening. Thanks again, Mace. When will the 2P grant scheme open?
The scheme will be ready to go in around about mid-January, although having said that, we're classifying, categorising, I should say, homes as 2P now, but actually getting into the scheme when the grant's been released is mid-January next year.
Thank you very much. There's a question here that I want to pose that is around assistance available. It's really important for our people to know that although it is convoluted and complex, that there is still support and assistance. And the question that's been asked is, will there be assistance available if I cannot live in my property while construction takes place? For example, can I use part of the grant to pay for temporary accommodation costs?
No, I'm afraid not, Eddie. The grants are for the work that needs to be done on the property and not for temporary accommodation costs. However,
Eddie, we absolutely know that this is going to be an issue for some people. Either they're going to have to move out to undertake the works, or in fact, they're not going to be able to get back in. They may have been out this whole time. So we're talking to government about what services and products are available. For example, the temporary accommodation assistance payment. We're talking to them about the extension of that product to ensure that it covers people while they need it, as well as the temporary accommodation service.
Let's stay there then in the vein of shared responsibility and navigating an unfamiliar terrain, and potentially both you and Matt. There's a question that's come through around, I've never done renovations before. I don't know how to manage this process. What help, offer, assistance is available?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. We know that some of these efforts at building retaining walls and flood remediation and lifting homes and stuff are going to be quite daunting for some homeowners. So yes, you can use part of the construction grant money to pay for a project manager who would help you ensure the work is completed appropriately at your home. And we'll provide advice on that during the Category 2P conversations.
Thanks. I want to jump forward a little bit. And there's a question here around lifting up homes to repair the floors. I'd imagine, and we've all seen a lot of extensive damage, that people will want to protect flooring or homes from future flooding. And the question here, Matt, is I want to lift up my house to repair the floor and protect it from future flooding, but I'm waiting for my property category. If I pay for the work myself, and then find out my property is a category 2P later, can I get repaid by the council?
Yes, potentially. There will be an ability for us to retrospectively talk to homeowners about category 2P work that they've done, and to potentially help with grants for that work. The homeowners would have need to have kept all the appropriate information. So if they'd want to have had licensed builders helping them do the work, kept receipts and so on. But probably important to stress that the 2P grant still only applies to future resilience. So it doesn't apply to something that the insurer would have taken care of. So maybe replacing the floor rather than the actual lifting of the house.
Matt, we'll go on to this next one here. Was one that was submitted to us. What if the construction cost alone is 25% of the CV, but the design and consenting grant makes it more than 25%? Is it still category 2P?
It can be if the homeowner is prepared to contribute the difference, the amount above the 25%, which we're finding some homeowners are talking to us about doing. If not, the home would become a category 3.
Thanks, Matt. I'll ask one more to you before I bring Mace back into the conversation. Can I apply for the construction grant if my insurer has paid for mitigations?
Yes, you can, but the insurance that had been paid wouldn't be included. So the grant payment might be reduced based on what the insurers have contributed to.
Thanks, Matt. Mace, what if I already spent my insurance money to repair my home and now my property is category 3? Is there a response to that? Can we share any light or further information on that question?
So thanks, Eddie. If you've already spent funding or your insurance funding on your home and the property is then categorised as category 3, then that insurance, that work won't be taken into account in terms of we would still provide a payout of up to 95% of the property.
Mace, we'll go on to this next one, and potentially you, but also Matt would have touched on it tonight, the thing around an independent review. Is there an option for an independent review if a property owner is not happy with the internal council review of a dispute?
Thanks, Eddie. I think it is really important in fairness that property owners do have the opportunity to seek a review of their categorisation. And so that option is available to property owners to lodge a dispute, which is then reviewed, which will be undertaken by an independent expert, and that independent expert's opinion is final once. Firstly, there's an internal review of information, and then there's a further process, which is then final. For a valuation dispute, the homeowner has 1 month after receiving the outcome of an independent review to apply to have a valuation determination by an independent valuer. So two things there. One's about categorisation and one's about valuation.
Thanks, Mace. Coming back to category 2P questions to you, Matt. Am I still eligible for the grant if I have completed the mitigation work on my property?
Yes, a similar answer to a question which you posed earlier. Retrospectively, we can allow 2P grants. Again, homeowners need to have kept documentation, dealt with licensed building practitioners, etc.
Moving on there, Matt, will the council guarantee the work being done because they are funding it? To what extent?
No, they won't. Council doesn't guarantee the work that's being done and doesn't accept any liability for it. The grant is simply what it says, and then it's the homeowner's responsibility to ensure that the work is done appropriately and has appropriate building consents and so on.
Linda, one to you. The more I ask these questions of Matt and Mace, the more I can't help but think the support, the assistance that we're offering people, usually the uptake is at the beginning. But what I'm hearing in this sort of drawn out process is it can become quite overwhelming and frustrating, and it could quite anger some people. What are the opportunities throughout this categorisation process, engaging with insurers and council, are there for our people to just reach out and say, look, this is a bit much?
Yeah, absolutely. We're certainly seeing that those anxiety levels are increasing. and it is getting really overwhelming. There's a lot of really great decisions now that have provided clarity, but it's really hard to kind of work your way through and understand it all and make some pretty big decisions that are going to affect you and your whānau. So we're out and about in community as much as possible. If you go onto our Auckland website, /recovery, you'll see the schedule of drop-ins that we're doing across Tāmaki Makaurau. We've got a great bunch of navigators, including now iwi and NGO navigators, so people from that community who really understand those communities there to help people kind of think and talk through everything.
Thank you very much. Listen, folks, we have been absolutely inundated by the pre-submitted questions, and I think we have done about as much justice as we can to them given the time constraints. And if it's okay with our panelists, I want to pivot now to the questions that are being asked through the Q&A feature. So thanks to everybody for submitting your questions for the live Q&A. There are so many we won't have time to answer all of them live tonight, but we'll be posting as many responses as we can onto the online FAQs after the webinar. So please head onto that platform as per the link that we've posted in the chat earlier. In the meantime, let's get into it without further ado. Mace, we have a home in Linfield, Auckland, and several adjacent properties and my own had land slips in the council-owned reversed behind our properties, or below our properties, resulting in slips to our properties above. These pose an immediate risk of further slips within 1 year, highlighted in the EQC geotech reports via our insurance. When will this be remedied to ensure we do not suffer further damage? Or alternatively, what is the process for the council to resolve the land instability in the reserve below our homes? Mace.
Sure, thanks, Eddie. So the responsibility is certainly with the homeowners to protect their own homes, but I really would encourage landowners, and I can take this up with our parks and community facilities team who manage those reserves, to reach out to you and your neighbours and take you through that process, and they will be focused also on ensuring that no further damage happens on the reserve. But the responsibility primarily for protection of homes is with individual landowners.
Going on to one here also for you, Mace, can you authorise us to start reinstating our house by not being penalised through Category 3 or 2P buyout insurance payout? It's been nearly a year. It's a very long time, Mace. It's been nearly a year and it's not safe or nice to live in while we pay our full mortgage and rates.
I think it's an important decision for you to make, and if you are to reach out to the navigators and seek any, they may be able to point you to some advice about whether that's feasible. We understand that it's been a long time. Making those robust, quite detailed decisions has taken time and across the region. But that is an important decision to make, as I've said before, where those repairs and remediation are undertaken in good faith and you can show evidence of those repairs. And if your home was in a Category 2P or a Category 3, that will be taken into account. But please make an informed decision before you start that.
Eddie, there's also, just to add, there's been a little bit of guidance from the Insurance Council New Zealand on this issue as well recently, which I dare say we can paste into the chat or add a link to, which kind of reinforces what Mace has just said. The Insurance Council are saying, do not wait. As long as you do things properly and keep receipts and paperwork, get on with using your insurance proceeds.
That's very helpful. Thank you both. Matt, to you then, how will you ensure the funding pool covers all Category 3 properties?
We did a fairly robust calculation before we got into our negotiations with central government and worked out what it was we were dealing with and the quantity of homes and the types of damage. Of course, that is changing week by week as we get round house by house around Auckland and work through categorisations and begin the buyout process. But we're tracking every single home that we categorise and every single decision that we make, all of the buyout valuations and so on. And there is some headroom. We're still tracking to how we expected to in terms of the overall quantum and calculation. Having said all of that, I just would briefly add, There was an undertaking from central government to negotiate with us, again, in good faith, particularly Category 3. If there's tons more Category 3 homes than we expected, we can go back and have an in good faith conversation with the Treasury.
One more then related to that, I suppose, before we pivot to the red, yellow sticker program, if you like. Are mixed-use residential business properties included in the categorisation framework?
Businesses are not included in the framework. Mace, can you talk to care homes perhaps as a category?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thank you, Eddie. Yes, where there are mixed use, we need to make an individual assessment about those mixed uses and what the uses are. For places like residential care homes, it really is having the people there are often vulnerable in terms of being able to evacuate from a flood or a hazard event. So we're wanting to take particular care in ensuring that no one is left in that vulnerable situation. But it does require, because of the ownership arrangements or licensing arrangements with people living there, the important thing is people living there. Mm-hmm. And it's a legally established dwelling. That's where we come from that, but it is an individual circumstance.
One more for you, Matt, before I move to my learned friend to my left, Linda. Matt, can we just get rid of the red, yellow stickers? What are the benefits of keeping that for such a long period and asking us to provide engineer reports, which is duplicating effort from the categorisation assessments? The stickers, Matt, can they go?
Yeah. When I say yeah, I mean no. The important to stress again that the red stickers or placards, as they're sometimes known, red, yellow and white placards, are completely separate to the categorisation process. So the categorisation process is looking at a long-term risk to life, over tens of years. The stickers or placards are short-term danger, immediate danger in buildings not being safe to occupy. And it can quite often be the case that a red sticker does not equal a long-term risk to life and a Category 3. They're quite different things, short-term and long-term risk.
I think the second thing to add to that, Matt, is so the placards are typically a Building Act process, so they often drive the process for getting the building back up to a safe level for occupation. So that's where the case managers for the placards or the stickers will be working with you if you still have a red or a yellow sticker on the properties. What I'm pleased about is we're now less than 180 red stickers, down from over 600, and just under 1,000 yellow stickers, down from 2,500. So progress is being made. So thank you very much for working with our building compliance people, and it's great to see people getting back in their homes.
Thanks, team. Linda, what immediate support or interim measures is the council offering to homeowners who are in a state of limbo until June 2024? How can we mitigate the financial and emotional strain during this extended period of uncertainty, or further extended period of uncertainty, I might say?
Yeah, look, I think, honestly, Eddie, the best thing that we can do is just keep doing as we're doing, which is getting out there every day, undertaking these assessments and working through them as quickly and as methodically as we can. But equally important, I think we're all on the same page that being able to give really clear expectations to people is the next most important thing, so that people know what's coming, they know what to expect. People can manage things a lot better, and they can hold out if they know that they can trust the date in front of them. So that's really what we're focused on at the moment. And alongside that, I guess we continue to advocate to central government around those different services and products I mentioned before. So the temporary accommodation service and the temporary accommodation assistance payments. And that's on top of the rates relief that's been offered by council this year and next.
Linda, one more before I come to Mace around Category 2A. This support that we're offering all of our whānau that are A, on the webinar, and B, that can't be here tonight but are adversely impacted and affected, have we designed and devised these support systems by talking to ourselves as council, or are the experiences that you're hearing day in and day out from the people that are on the webinar plus others, are they informing what we're doing to provide support that is tailored, is affected and quite needed, frankly?
Yeah, excellent question, as usual. Yeah, absolutely. We stood this thing up really quickly based on what we knew was some really good evidence about how it worked in previous events. We are very much having to tailor it for the Auckland context, and that's why we're really excited that we've now got community organisations and marae and iwi working alongside us as we refine the service to make sure that it meets people's needs. And we are constantly looking at the feedback that we get through from homeowners and others who are engaged with the service to look at how we can improve it to make it work for their needs.
Yeah, thanks very much for the response. It's appreciated for sure. Mace, is Category 2A a new one?
No. So Category 2A has been in the government framework right from the beginning, from June. But we have used it recently, particularly Category 2A is about it's a property that needs further investigation or there are other consequential decisions to be taken before we can give a final category. And the type of situation we've used Category 2A is where there's potentially a community-based intervention risk mitigation intervention that we can see that could be developed, but we don't know if that is totally feasible. So we need to do some further investigation. We understand that delay, but again, as Linda said, it's keeping people updated about how we're making progress on that particular project. And that will be across our blue-green networks in some cases, and it is in a number of situations where we've had land instability, where there's a really practical intervention, but we need some other dominoes, if you like, to drop before we can make a final decision.
I think this next one goes to you, and if it doesn't, could you give it a stab anyway, because we're flowing quite well tonight. Will there be a right of first refusal if the council at some point in the future decides to offer the property back to market rather than using it as a public space?
So that's a good question. So we don't have a first right of refusal offer in the categorisation scheme. It is a voluntary sale to the council for future use. But if any properties, there's a number of options for properties. Some of them will be hazard management, such as flood management in the case of a blue-green network. Some of them might be a public open space where it's managed with no further residential use. But there may be other opportunities where collectively there can be some redevelopment or master planning that allows recycling of land into residential use. And we know that where that can be safely done, we should reasonably do that in an Auckland context.
One more for you, Mace, before I start down the line again to my left. There will be hundreds of homes that fall into the ability to mitigate in terms of raising, but will need neighbour agreement, as if this process wasn't complex as it is. Do we have an idea of the extent of homes impacted by this limitation for mitigation?
It's a good question, Eddie, and where there are height to boundary limitations, that will be a consideration that needs to be taken into account in that feasibility assessment. So that's a critical part of the gateway, that second gateway of feasibility assessment. What are some of those limitations for completing the works? And I think that type of thing will come up reasonably quickly. We haven't done an assessment based on what we know now, but that is the type of thing that we anticipate. Some of those other areas could be significant ecological areas where there's constraints in place with the unitary plan. So those are all the constraints we need to take into account.
Thank you very much. Speaking of constraints, to you, Matt, 2P, how much do you fund? Is it co-funding or full funding to do the work?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Co-funding or full funding from whom?
Perhaps if you're, yeah. I mean, is there an indication? Is it a couple of 100,000, couple of million? What are we talking? Or is it a case-by-case basis?
Oh, it's, let me start, I guess, at what I think's been asked. We've talked about 25% of the property's value, property's CV. 2p is a better outcome all around, really, if we can make 2p work. So 2p is a better outcome for homeowners because it allows them to stay in their homes. And it's a better outcome for all of Auckland's, all of the ratepayers of Auckland who are avoiding a category 3, which is the purchase of a full home, as opposed to a 25% contribution to a 2p. So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
I think maybe just to be clear, there is no co-payment from the homeowner required. So where there is works to be done and it's at 25% of the CV, council through a grant will fund that works and there will be no cost to the homeowner.
Unless, as Mesa said earlier, the cost is over 25%, then you are into a co-funding situation. Right. If the solution is more than 25% of the CV, should a homeowner choose to want to contribute to that, that's allowable.
Matt, potentially this one comes to you. Why do Auckland whānau now need to pay 5% homeowner contribution for category 3 buyout?
There's a question of stewardship of all of Auckland's ratepayers' money here. The deliberations and the conversations at governing body focused heavily on how best to balance the burden upon all of the ratepayers of Auckland who are contributing to these category 3 buyouts, and should a contribution be made by the homeowners themselves towards the buyout. There were a range of views on whether that 5% should be 5% or another number, but that's the thinking behind where the 5% came from.
And Matt, do either you or Mace have an indication on how long people have got to opt in before they miss out? So the question is, my neighbour hasn't opted into categorisation. How long do they have to opt in before they miss out?
We haven't put any into the scheme at the moment, Eddie, but there will be a time where we need to close the scheme down. Our real focus is on as much recruitment as we can into the scheme for those people who find themselves in intolerable risk.
I think at this point it's fair to say we're actively looking for homeowners rather than thinking about a date to shut them out.
Right. Matt, if a property is repeatedly flooded into a house but is not considered intolerable risk to life, what are the options there?
Well, there may be a circumstance if we're in a blue-green network area where there can be some relief in that type of situation for a property owner who finds their home flooded but not to an intolerable level. But it is this scheme is about life or risk to life as opposed to risk to property per se. That's not having empathy with property owners that repeatedly go through a disaster recovery cycle. That's really critical. So that's where there is intolerable risk, category 2P or category 3 has applied. But I really would also suggest, what are the options, looking at the options to reduce the risk at individual properties where they can, whether that's through drainage, it may be through house raising, and I understand that's not something that we're funding right now, but I really would encourage people to do that.
Matt, could you please confirm if the team are working throughout the Christmas period or if the office will be shutting down and the process halted until Jan? And I acknowledge that for some of us, we're taking a break. And for other people, they've finally got the chance to potentially turn their minds now to the situation that is, will our office or the recovery office be shutting down and the process halted until Jan?
The really crucial role of navigators, so those customer-facing roles, will be working through Christmas. So we have a staff of navigators working through Christmas who can still provide that one-on-one service and contact and touch point for homeowners if they have any questions or need any support.
Speaking of navigators, Linda, is there an expected time frame for navigators to respond to email questions or responses or queries?
Yes, there is. So my expectation is that they should be going back to people within the week of being contacted at the very most, and preferably within a day or two of contact. So we certainly want to know if people are struggling to get the service they need, so that we can have a look at the numbers and how we're managing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This one here could potentially go to Matt or Mace, and it really is around, it's ensuring that these people have gotten the best possible deal. And I don't mean monetary. They have to live in their homes. It's their safe space. It's where they raise the young ones. Do we have to implement the mitigation measures proposed and recommended by Auckland Council, or can they get alternative opinions just to make sure that they are getting all that they deserve? Matt, Mace?
Yeah, most definitely, and I'll pick this up, and then if Mace wants to jump in, and we've talked to it in quite some detail tonight. That if people want an alternate second opinion on their valuation, that's available to them to do, and then approach us. If they want an alternate second opinion on how the categorisation has worked, or want to give us some information that they don't think we have and should have, that opportunity is open to us. And as I think I said earlier on, some of those decisions where we're given further information by homeowners can actually change fairly quickly if we've made a mistake, and we make mistakes, right?
I think just to follow on from Matt, if it's about a Category 2P option that our engineers have made, and there's an alternative option that's feasible and affordable and can be delivered practically within 2 years, absolutely, we're open to that. We don't have a mortgage on particular ideas, and it is your home in that situation, and your choice around what you do. The important decision we need to make is it eligible, and reducing that intolerable risk to life.
We've got another question here that potentially you can tag team with Matt before I come to Linda. And the question is, or the scenario is, we've been paid out for our repairs by an insurance company. The money is just sitting untouched, as we were told this money would go towards the 95% payout if we get a buyout. Did you say if I go ahead with the repairs and use my insurance payout, that I'll still get the 95% payout? Is that correct?
That's correct. If you go ahead in good faith and undertake that work, we will take that into account. Importantly, keeping all the documentation so we can have assurance around that. Thanks
very much. Linda, the question for you, for those of us that were able to be there and help our communities during the flooding and the storm, the cyclone, people didn't want to have to pick up the phone multiple different times to access the same service. And there's the wellbeing and there's support. There's the claims resolution service and there's insurance companies. Are we talking to each other, or are we making these poor people, they've been put out as it is? Are we making them pick up the phone multiple times, or do we talk to each other to make sure it's seamless and efficient and as effective as possible?
We certainly are talking to each other, and we certainly are aiming to make the experience as painless for people as possible. Certainly, we don't want people to have to be telling their story. These are tough stories for a lot of people, so we don't want people to have to tell them to lots of different people. It's a work in progress, to be honest, and we're continuing to look at how those navigators especially can be that kind of the anchor point between some of those key sources of information and support.
Thank you for that, Linda. Matt or Mace, if we start lifting our house before being assigned a categorisation, and again, I acknowledge that it's been a really hard year, and some people, they just want to do things, be proactive while they've got the opportunity. If we start lifting our house before being assigned a categorisation, will that affect the possibility for financial support?
No, not if the house is considered to be a Cat 2 mitigation and lifting the house was an acceptable solution. Retrospectively, the Cat 2P grant, if it's applicable and it's the right solution, would still apply.
Thank you. Mace, I might point this one in your direction. And the comment hand question is, this is brilliant work started by Council. I understand your current focus is Category 2 and 3, but what has Council done what has Council planned to improve the position of owners living in Category 1? Are you guys planning to upgrade the wastewater systems?
Thanks, Eddie. Category 1 is a broad category, as people know, but the Making Space for Water program is 7 different initiatives. Some of those are specific across 12 different catchments, which we blue-green networks, which are particular detention systems, making more space for water, daylighting streams, but also increasing awareness, increasing maintenance of catch pits, and undertaking proactive works to avoid further flooding. Will all of that be resolved? Probably not in the nature of the way development occurred across Auckland, but that's the endeavour, is to reduce as much as we can.
While I've got you there, Mace, it's clear that you have assessed a heap of properties already, yet there are only 9 2P properties. Does this mean that 2P is very stringent?
No, 2P isn't stringent. Where we can see a feasible option, those are being assessed. I'm expecting more of those to come through in the near future as we get more properties through the system. We anticipate, and this is only the best endeavours to an estimate, in the order of 100 to 110 properties across the 700 that we believe to be the intolerable risk to life could be a 2P. But we need to test that rigorously with homeowners and the engineers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to add to what Mesa said, Eddie, by their nature, they take a little longer to work through 2P. There's some engineering work required, some thinking, some testing. So they take longer than some of the really obvious category 3. So a lot of the numbers you're seeing that are coming through at the moment are just really obvious category 3s.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both. Linda, how are the Auckland Pacific Islanders or the Pacifica community receiving this very important information, mitigation and categorisation processes from council, or largely more broadly, the hard to reach diverse ethnic communities? Could be the migrant communities, could be our disability/access needs communities. Are we ensuring that our approach is diverse enough to make sure that it's not just a one-size-fits-all? How are we making sure that our diverse population communities within Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland are being reached?
Yeah, kia ora. It's certainly a key area that we're focusing on. Some of the ways that we're making sure that nobody is missing out on the information and support that they need. We've specifically targeted community leaders across those different organisations different population groups, to make sure that they have the information that they need to be able to pass on. We've been on Pacifica, Indian, a number of different radio stations, making sure that the information is getting out there. And we work really hard to make sure that our team within the Recovery Office reflects the diversity of the communities that we serve. So I'm really proud that we've got a number of different cultures and language abilities within the team, and that's just been complemented by engaging NGOs who have that particular experience. So we have Pacifica providers, we have ethnic peoples providers, we've got disability youth providers. We've really thought about who needs to have the information that we're worried about not being able to, and we've targeted to them.
Very glad to hear that. Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much for the question this evening. Mace, my home slid down the hill with the landslide. This is my tūranga waiwai. I can't sell the land. It has been in my family for generations. Can I get council support to help with remediation to allow a new build? For example, retaining wall to help build a foundation.
Yeah, they're hard stories to hear, aren't they? The situations that so many people are in. Yes, potentially, if there is a 2P solution which is feasible and fits within all of the parameters that we've spoken about, wherever we possibly can, we want to let homeowners try and stay on their land and make their homes safe, or rebuild safe homes, or put in some sort of engineering mitigation wherever that's possible and fits within the criteria and removes that intolerable risk to life.
While you're there, there's a very good question. If we look around our city, there is a lot of development that is ongoing, receiving consenting applications and requests all the time. And while a lot of people are rebuilding and new builds and things, we think of our community that was adversely impacted. And the question here is, will council be fast tracking / prioritising consents related to this recovery work?
Yes, we are. There's already a fast track consenting process for anything that's tagged as a recovery project. So there's a particular code that gets applied to recovery projects when they come into our building consenting team, and they do prioritise those and fast track them. And evidence has shown that they are all quicker than the usual process.
Thank you. There's a question here, now, Mace, if you'd like to kick it off in terms of a response. And I've heard tonight and also seen in the materials also this thing around a threshold of risk to life. And I guess the question is, I mean, what does that look like? There's a question here. The person assessing my property said it needs to be at least a metre of water inside the property. Anything below 0.5 metres probably won't be a risk to life. Is that correct?
Yeah, Eddie, these are really difficult issues where people's personal homes are being flooded.
Yes.
We're seeing these sorts of impacts on property. So typically with flooding, we are taking into account two parameters. One is velocity, so the speed of the water around the home, and then the depth of the water in the home and the depth of water outside where people are able to evacuate. So those are difficult situations if where it is around 0.5 of a metre in a home on a flat grade that can be waded from and people can evacuate safely from that home. But we understand that is a really challenging situation for homeowners.
While we're there, and we haven't been asked this, but I think naturally it's a question that I would want to ask. When you do get deliver this news, or when people are receiving, at the end of the day, you've got a threshold to life. For a lot of these people, it's actually, well, it's my livelihood. And again, is there crossover between those assessments and the work that Linda does in terms of that wraparound support? Some people will respond then and there. Others internalise it and they take a while to unravel and process it. So I guess, at what point when we're making these assessments and delivering these sort of verdicts and judgments, is that wraparound support coming into the fore? And, if you'll indulge me, I think it's really important for those that are watching, listening tonight to know that we don't just deliver these things and then move on. We are looking for a bit of a pipelined approach. And I'm getting a nod to turn this one to you, Linda, so a response, if you would.
Thanks, Mace. Look, I think it's really important actually that we, as tough as it is, that we're really clear about what is likely to come out of these assessments for people. We don't want people waiting for a really long time in the hope that a Category 3 or a 2P is going to be a solution for them when that's probably not the case. So as upfront as we can be about that, the better, even though it's really tough, and we still want people to go through the process. Just to make sure we know that it can be really devastating when the solution or the answer that you thought was coming for you and your whānau doesn't emerge. So we absolutely are looking at how we provide ongoing support for people and for their wellbeing, and how we work with other parts of council, like our Healthy Waters whānau, to provide some information and advice about how they might reduce that flood risk.
Eddie, just to add, once the technical work is done, we're quite deliberate then about how some of these really key pieces of information are fed back to homeowners and who does that feeding back. The people that contact the homeowners have got the appropriate skills to have those difficult conversations and to support them through some of the implications and the impacts of those decisions and conversations as well.
I'm glad to hear that a careful and considered and a measured approach to how we communicate these things to our communities. I then guess a question for us is, does council conduct a desktop assessment when they're thinking about these things? Are we using data from potentially January, February, or are we doing site assessments of the property, or we're doing both? What kind of reassurance can we give people tonight that it's not just desktop research that we're doing? We're doing all that we can with what we have to ensure that it is careful, considered, measured and appropriate.
Sure, Eddie. I think so. Firstly, yes, we do have data and models, hydrological models. We understand the hazard and where there's been previous landslides. But the most important, so those desktop assessments happen. So that gives us a really good clue about what the risks are, what some of the outcomes might be, what the issues are. But then it's a site-by-site assessment, often talking to the homeowner to understand the experience they've had during those events, which we know can be difficult as well. But gathering that factual information in an urban environment where there can be quite diverse hydrological or flooding circumstances that we may not have been able to model with our hydrological models, with our flooding models. So really important to do those site visits, really important to talk to the people who experienced it, as difficult as that is, and then make a decision based on good evidence, understanding what the future risk will be.
Thanks, Mace. Matt, is there anything to add to that response?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are the process that Mace has described can quickly lead us to Category 1. Some Category 1 decisions can be really quick based on desktop analysis, but as soon as you start to get into Category 2 and Category 3, it's that sequence of things that Mace has described.
There's another question here, potentially for either you, Matt, or Mace. Hi, my home is written off, and I would not want to rebuild on this section again. I'm up in the Waitakares. Is it probable that the council will buy my section and turn it back to bush?
It's so situation specific, it's hard to say. That sounds like a likely outcome, but there's a number of things that would need to happen. That the home would need to be categorised as Category 3 for council to buy it. And then what we intend to do as we move into next year is start some place-based conversations with each of the different communities within which we're operating. And how the land that's freed up is used is going to be in a large part contributed to by the communities themselves. So I wouldn't like to say that any particular piece of land that council would impose an outcome on it. That would be a collaborative community consultation.
Thank you. I suppose we need to reiterate this because it keeps coming up. If we start lifting our home before being assigned a categorisation, so again, it's that whole, we want to be proactive, we want to do things, what can we do or what are we potentially advised not to do ahead of being assigned a categorisation, and to what extent will that affect the possibility for financial support?
I can take that. Yes, a very similar question to the one that we've been asked already. It would depend upon there being a Category 2P mitigation and that what the homeowner had done fitted within an acceptable Category 2P mitigation. So whatever the homeowner does, whether they lift the property or do some work to an overland flow path or build a retaining wall in the case of geotechnical risk, it would still need to fit within our criteria for an acceptable Category 2P solution. So my recommendation would be to be talking to us as soon as possible about that before going ahead with that work. Should that work fit within those Category 2P criteria, then yes, as we've said a couple of times, retrospectively, should all the paperwork and stuff exist, we will fund retrospectively.
Thank you very much. We're coming up now to the top of the hour. So the last question, Linda, I will pose to you. As our house has been red stickered and left vacant for 11 months, we have severe moulding inside. Is this taken into consideration with regards to long-term fatal risks as family member has chronic respiratory disease?
Yeah, we absolutely want to know about situations like that, Eddie. It's really important that we understand where people are in those situations so we can look at what support is needed. So that's quite outside of the categorisation process. We're working really closely with the Red Cross and other funders to look at how we support people who need to make repairs to make their homes healthy and safe. So please reach out to navigators so we can understand a little bit better.
Look, we are at the top of the hour. However, there are still several hundred people online, and I wondered if the panelists will indulge me if we just provide an opportunity for each of you to potentially sum up, because I know that This is the evening. Families are having dinner. People are coming and going from homes and things. In the event that they've missed out the substantive part of tonight's conversation, although we will be posting the recording later, maybe if we start with you, Matt, in terms of some insights and reflections or something that you really just want to communicate to our viewers who are still online.
I think my advice to anybody listening who has a question that they feel is urgent and important and significant is to reach out to us and make contact, and sometimes we may not get back to immediately, but push and ask and make sure you get your questions in front of us and bring your situations to our attention. The kind of thing that Linda has just talked about. If you're living in a home which is damp and mouldy and is making your whānau ill, you need to tell us about it, bring it to our attention. We can get navigators around there and we can try and help. And the other thing I would say, thanks Eddie, is if you haven't opted in to the process and brought your home to our attention, I don't want you to fall between the cracks or fall between the gaps. We need to know about everybody. At the heart of this is we're just trying to help. This isn't about minimising costs or any of that nonsense. We're trying to get people out of harm's way, and it will take us longer to get to you and help you if you don't reach out and make us aware of your situation, please. Please make us aware and let us try and help you.
Thanks, Matt. Linda, any reflections from you? Any key messages that you'd like to sort of wrap up our dialogue this evening with?
Oh, I guess I just reflect, Eddie, even for us who are in the middle of all this, there's a lot of information to take on. There's kind of new decisions and updates being made all the time. And yeah, so I really just acknowledge how overwhelming it must be for people out there listening. So please do reach out to us. We won't always have the answers, but we promise to work with you to try and find them. And I guess the other thing is just, again, acknowledging that the break is coming up, and to continue looking after one another, and to reach out for support if you need it.
Thank you very much, Linda. Mace, from you?
Kia ora, Eddie. Look, I would really tautoko or support what both Matt and Linda have said. It's so critical that we can come and talk to you if your property was affected, if you haven't opted in, and it is voluntary after all, but please, I would encourage you to do that to remain safe. And just to acknowledge that we are coming up to the holiday break, the end of a year that has been really challenging for many of you, or all of you, and really significant events that have impacted on your lives. And it's so important to look after each other over this coming period as we get to the anniversary as well in late January and middle of February. So we appreciate your patience and working with us proactively, and we hope we're showing empathy and support for you, so you can live safely in your home and in the community.
Thanks to our panelists. I want to thank our staff who have enabled this event. They've pulled it together. They've helped us behind the scenes. We thank you. I thank you, Matt. I thank you, Linda. I thank you, Mace, for all the terrific work and for tonight's session. But mostly, I'd like to thank each and every one of you that's taken the time to tune in tonight, in whole or in part. There's a lot going on. It's a very busy time of the year, and it's been a very, very big year indeed. We'll be publishing all frequently asked questions, a document in our recovery newsletter. It will contain some of the questions you heard tonight and others we haven't had the time to answer. Again, thank you very much indeed for attending, and we wish you a very, very good night indeed.